to enforce parking on private property. And the community center is, although it's a public community center, it is not considered, that they don't have the jurisdiction to issue citations in the community center parking lot. So again, I encourage the commission to work with the city to require that local police enforce EVs only parking in the EV charging parking spaces, just as they enforce other vehicle code infractions. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And once again, enforcement. Other public comments on any of the four presentations? Yes, sir?
Can we comment, can we have three?
Would you come up to the microphone, please?
Yeah, just, can we have 3 minutes per? I mean, I can't talk about them all in 3 minutes.
We are open to being flexible with
Okay.
respect to the 3-minute rule,
Okay.
given the hundreds of people that are waiting behind you this evening.
Okay, I'll introduce myself as somebody who's a
Yes, Leo.
alternative climate action commissioner, and I have 45 years. I've run a company here in the California wine industry from New Mexico all the way to Oregon and Washington in agriculture, working with vineyards that are thousands of acres. And I have a PhD in chemical ecology, and I have a bit of a high finance background too. So I look at this from a fiduciary responsibility of the city to the population, right? The people in the city. And I was thinking just practically about the Miyake Forest. How do you pronounce that?
My Japanese is as limited as yours, but
Okay.
given the spelling in English, Miyawaki,
Miyawaki.
having grown up near Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I stumble on this.
Miyawaki.
However, Miyawaki is how we're being presented with it in the English
Yeah.
script. Miyawaki.
It's a Miwok kind of name from the Indians probably or something. So I think what the city could use, as I look at what all the wineries can use, and what's happening right now in agriculture in California is we are moving, especially with the nurseries, say all the nurseries locally, all the nurseries for the wine industry, but the residential nurseries. We're looking for new plants, and the constant conversation like at Wine Country Garden, or if we go over to Sonoma Mission Gardens, is all the plants that have been sold into the city are the wrong plants. They're plants that have the wrong temperature. Now, they're being grown in the valley, Central Valley, so we're in a hunt right now for new varieties. And it's interesting to plant the plants that are endemic to here, but those plants are being disappeared by the fires. So you look at the hillsides here on the east side of both Napa and Sonoma, you'll notice that they're going to be purple colored by the end of the summer, midsummer, July, which is the hottest month. Same thing on the other side in Napa Valley, if you go one valley inland. And so this whole region is starting to become Sacramento. But Sonoma Valley has a special case. It's always going to be cooler because the valley is so short and the bay is so large that our temperature is going to be more modulated. But nonetheless, a lot of the plants that are endemic here are dying. So it would be very interesting to have a residential Miyake forest that could be recommended by the city for the whole city to plant, the residential owners. And everybody, Steve Ledson out there building expensive homes, his biggest problem is finding the right new plant materials. So I could really see that the city could use a list to give to the public, to everybody who lives in the city, and publish that list. These are the trees that we should have. So I'll just throw that out on that project. I think it's a great project. Going back to like having a fiduciary responsibility, if this was my customer, the city of Sonoma, and I see the carbon sequestration, that's a very interesting and challenging idea. Sequestration, you're talking about, you want to move something into something, right? And you also talked about capture and getting credits. So the idea is that it's very loosey-goosey, this thing with the biochar. we are going to get a credit. The city has to tell people, we're going to take all this money, and this money is going to be just as valuable as if we went to a corporation and bought carbon credits. Instead of putting the carbon in the ground, there's another pathway, isn't there, where the city could research its alternative and its fiduciary responsibility to do this, which is rather than go and buy biochar to put in the ground, it takes a lot to believe that's going to work. You're going to put it in the ground, do nothing with it. You're not going to amend it into a soil amendment. It's just going in the ground, at least the way it's written here. And that's the same as getting a 2030 carbon credit. I don't think I buy into that. I think that somebody could really take us in an article and do some investigative reporting and find out the city wasted their money, because they could have taken the money, and if it doesn't work, if it isn't working, why not just burn the money up and say it didn't work if it doesn't work? In other words, it has to work. Whatever you're saying that this biochar is going to do, it really has to work. And I'm not sure that I would tell, for example, cake bread sellers. I looked up how many wineries are using it in Napa Valley, doing any testing with it. There's no sequestration in exchange for 2030 carbon credits in Napa Valley with biochar. But there
Let me
is-
just interrupt briefly, Leo, to note that nothing in our
Actually,
presentation
he needs to finish his comment.
expressly
It's not a
talks
discussion.
about credit purchases.
Right.
It's all biochar sequestration. There's not a single word about credit and carbon credit acquisition. in
But you
there.
mentioned crediting with 2030. But anyway, some investigative reporter might come in. I'm just doing a little, helping you out here, a little protection. This conversation is loose enough that somebody could easily do that. So if the money was going to be used to do something with the 2030, as you did say that, right? The 2030 carbon load that here is in the atmosphere, that's the amount of CO2. Currently, it's at, 380, 390 parts per billion. That would be offsetting some of that carbon as a do-good and as a fiduciary responsibility we have to the planet, but also to all the people who pay taxes here in the city. What if it would be maybe better to go and find another publicly held company and a city that bought credits from that publicly held company, some other, you mentioned, templated idea. So I'll just point out, this is not templated, this biochar. It is not templated. It should be looked at very carefully, and I say that with, considerable experience, working with the vineyard business. I would know, I think, if biochar was being used. I would know this. And I don't know this. I know that it's considered completely experimental. So that's the one thing I think that we should look at, is that my chemistry background tells me that there's no benefit to biochar in the soil for CO2 capture. So the offset you said was for 2030 for CO2 specifically. That's the chemical. And we know the molecular weight of all that. Just wait a minute. And we know that biochar does not sequester CO2. They're working on this kind of thing at Los Alamos right now with silica particles, but certainly they would know if biochar was going to work. And so far, I don't see any American Association for the Advancement of Science, no American Chemical Society backing of this. People are looking into this. It's very entrepreneurial, and I would just caution what we're going to do with this. Why not find a template for this? And why not be flexible enough to, why buy the biochar? The city there risks owning the responsibility that this isn't entrepreneuring in the biochar business. And you have something to sell, so to speak, because you have the biochar equipment. Why not find something as an alternative, just in case the city wanted to have the option to think about this in a fiduciary way and say, well, the biochar is a little experimental, but it's not experimental to buy carbon credits that can be sold internationally. The city could then own those credits and get something for those credits. So anyway, I think that they're all great ideas, but I do question the biochar. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and your questioning. Your expertise in the wine industry is greatly respected, and you and I and Bruce Cakebread should talk about the work we've done together since you mentioned Cakebread, and Dunham is a major user of biochar on their system. We've had meetings at them. There's nothing experimental about this, and there's no intention to use the elemental carbon to capture carbon. It's the weight of the carbon, typically in the ground with compost. There are lots of details that we don't have time for at this point. But this is research that's well known with thousands of scientific articles that are quite compelling. But thank you for your comments. Do we have other public comments? We had a gentleman who was up before, and invite you up at this time.
Hello, my name's Peter Gallagher. I have a master's degree in chemical engineering. When you spoke about the electrification of basically the grid, the mention of battery storage was used. I think that should be considerable when you do your architectural review, and I'm willing to volunteer to help.
Thank you for the volunteer. Thank you very much. Any other comments from the public on the 4 presentations this evening? Yes, Joel.
Just real briefly, I appreciate the forest idea, and I think it's excellent. My issue, I'm having this issue myself. This beautiful tree in our front yard is going to shade any sort of solar panels I put up on my roof. And in my backyard, you know, I've got some serious food production that I'm doing, and the trees I have back there are also interfering with the sun that's hitting my food production. So I would just, you know, I don't know what if the growth of this forest is low enough, then it's not an issue.
The Miyawaki Forest at the location we've identified as prime for it is separate enough from houses that it wouldn't, they tend to be shorter than the big tall trees. I sympathize and identify with you, sir. When I lived in Oakland years ago before moving to Sonoma, I had one of the early solar systems on the roof there in the home I owned and loved it. Here in Sonoma, we have no solar on my roof. Why? Because we have 150-year-old deodar cedars all around the house, and I'll be damned if I'm going to cut any of them down. So we've had solar people out looking from Solar Run and some of the other firms, and it can't be done with trees. So not every home is available for that.
I just want to make one very brief comment about battery storage, battery electricity storage systems and the safety concerns. And I think we need to look at that in the big picture, which is, even though there have been some battery fires, the danger of having flammable gas piped into everybody's house far outweighs, I think, any danger of battery storage. So you've got to look at what you're talking about eliminating. You know, eliminating gas is going to greatly increase the safety, even though the battery storage might have a safety concern.
And the new data on gas stoves, and especially small children, is quite compelling. It's getting more by the week lately. Any other public comments at this point before we grab the gavel?
Before you close, David, if I could just say, I was texting earlier, so if anyone saw me, that was just because a member of the public contacted me by text and said they were unable to get into make public comment, and I referred that message to staff, so I don't know if we can close public comment with confidence that we've heard from all the public.
So we wouldn't want to do that.
So that issue should be fixed, and it does not appear there are any comments on, any hands raised on Zoom right now.
Then I'll take one more moment to just double check to see. My response was acknowledged with the thanks, but apparently they did not or do not have comments at this time if they did manage to make it back on to the Zoom.
I just want to mention the public comments I made. I also emailed on the link on the website, and I don't know if you guys got that, but
I did not.
We have a public comment coming in.
Yeah, so there was one that got sent in at 6:43 with that same issue that Vice Chair Conlon was mentioning. Do you want me to go ahead and read it right now, Chair, or?
Yes, of course. That
you,
we're at
Matthew.
that point, I believe. I don't see others clamoring for the microphone.
Okay. This is from David Leland. Dear Commissioners, for whatever reasons, I have not been able to join the meeting by Zoom, access it through the city portal, or view the meeting on the city YouTube channel. So I'm submitting a few comments via email. First, congratulations to all for creation and activation of this commission. It has been a long time coming, but great to see it off the ground, and congratulations to all of the commissioners. Regarding the ad hoc committees, most of the committee reports tier off specific actions identified in the city's climate action plan with suggested timelines and proposed budgets. This is a good starting point given the effort that has gone into developing the plan. The building and solid waste reports depart from this approach and read more like background papers. I would encourage the Commission to revisit these reports and add specific actions drawn from the climate action plan with timeframes and budgetary information, as has been done for the other reports. This would unify and strengthen the overall suite of actions proposed by the Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this important and exciting work. David Leland. And then I would like to note too, I will upload this to the document center on the city website.
Thank you, Matthew. So we're at a point now to close public comment. Does that seem right, staff?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Public comment is now officially closed. Travis, I see next is written reports. Are we presenting the written reports into the record? They're already on the website, I believe.
Yes, they have all been uploaded in the agenda packet, so the next step will be to discuss or give the presentation on the community engagement.
Oh, well, but that's before we do any, and then we do the discussion after that. Yes, all right. So next is the community engagement. I have a couple of comments before we introduce the PowerPoint slides. There's the cover note is up. Effective engagement of the public is central to success in achieving real climate action in Sonoma, in the United States, and globally. We make a clear distinction here in this presentation you're going to see in a moment between traditional outreach and true engagement. This is not an outreach program, it's an engagement, two-way, multi-way program, not outreach in the traditional sense. Each of us needs to take steps every day with effective climate action in mind. We can't just sit back and rely on others to deal with the climate challenge. We need to move ahead ourselves daily. It's a daily act that's required. That relates to leadership. Leadership is essential to move us all forward as an effective team. Sonoma has the capacity to exercise such leadership, and this commission is central to making that happen in an effective way. Finally, as an introductory point, I'd like to express my thanks to a community volunteer, a relatively new resident of Sonoma, named Norma Fogelberg, who's here this evening. Norma, who has provided her expertise in community engagement to greatly help our ad hoc devise our approach. The ad hoc consists of myself and Kendall Clemens, and we greatly appreciate the help of Ms. Fogelberg in getting us to the point we're at. Next slide, please. Basically, the Resident Engagement Network, our public engagement process, community engagement process, is designed to support climate actions in the city of Sonoma. We have 4 primary action categories within it. Collecting and distributing information about climate, information about Sonoma's climate actions, about our CPA, the county climate program, and so on. Second, Very important, engaging volunteers. We will not achieve our goals just relying on the city as city or the commission as commission. We need volunteers. We need tens of them, hundreds of them. Volunteers. Third, creating and managing events. There will be events. They need to be important events. They need to be two-way, multi-way engagements. And fourth, we need to coordinate with the City of Sonoma website and with social media in order to get out the message and receive the message. Again, two-way communication. And the City of Sonoma website, as wonderful it is at the moment, could use marginal improvements. We intend in the climate arena to work with the city to make that happen. Next slide, please. In respect to creating and sustaining public partnerships, we will not intend to do this ourselves. We've already identified and begun communications with a wide range of local groups, all of whom have social media contact, they have websites, they have meetings, they have volunteers, they have donors, and we need to inject effective climate action into all of it. I don't think I need to read every name to you here, but this is the kind of approach we propose to take. So city climate action engagement will outreach and reach out to each of these groups, to all of these groups, encouraging them to put climate at the center of their actions. This is part of what we mean by leadership in community engagement, and working with them. We were just talking about wineries, the vintners and growers are on the list, and so on, across the board. This is a very important part of an effective engagement network. Next slide, please. We want to engage directly, Kendall, with the high school. I want people to know that under Kendall's leadership, we actually had 4 presentations already at Sonoma High School. They were effective. Kendall, the Youth Commission member, has been championing this already, and we look forward to more of that work at our important high school. And we look forward to the head of school and the other administrators helping define her participation and that of her colleagues in the school, and the teachers, and the outreach includes also to the parents. And in a minute, when I've done with the slides, we'll ask Kendall to say a little more about that as the other member here of this ad hoc. Next slide. Publicity, obviously important. Nobody's surprised to see this slide. And here's the list of the various elements that communication channels that we'll be working directly with to get out the word and to receive the word. Letters to the editor will be encouraged as well. So again, it's two-way, not just communication, though this is mostly publicity through this channel. Next slide, please. And we have important interface planned with the City of Sonoma. I mentioned already the website. The website needs a little help. We intend to work with the website. We tend to deal with some of the social media noted here. We will have flyers for the stores and restaurants. We're already active in the Visitors Bureau, I'm told. We will have mailers for residents here in the city of Sonoma, and of course we'll be coordinating events. So there's a lot of coordination with the city of Sonoma as part of the continuing work of the Climate Action Commission's public engagement team. Next slide, please. Here's an interesting approach, I think, and I hope you will too, where we're going to subdivide the city into 4 quadrants, 4 zones we're calling them, and we're going to engage volunteers in each zone. We'll be looking for a citizen leader and joint leader, 2 or 3, as many as we can get, in each zone, so the burden doesn't fall only on a centralized public engagement, citizen engagement leader, but it cascades out into these areas. And when you see some of the events, you'll see how we link to the 4 areas of the city. Next slide, please. We intend to conduct resident engagement sessions in each of the 4 quadrants. The dates are proposed here. Hopefully the council will agree with us on this in terms of holding resident engagement sessions, one in each of the 4 quadrants physically. At least one will be figured out how to do it virtually, so that David Leland and others who aren't here can be involved in the process through the modern digital structure. Next slide, please. And the budget, we're proposing a budget of $3,500. Those are estimated facility charges for the 4 resident sessions, some supplied materials for those engagement events, a resident information and reference document that we want to prepare that'll be posted online through the city website and elsewhere. And we have not included costs for staff hours and canvassing at this point, but there may be further budget discussion as this all rolls forward with the city council and the new city manager and so on. At the last slide, it may be. I'm not looking at my own notes on it. Yeah. All right. Kendall, dive in.
Okay, so I'm looking at my notes here, but I think you covered everything very well on the resident engagement actions. And I also wanted to thank Norma for her work with David to help create this plan. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to meet with you guys. And then I just wanted to emphasize on the key takeaways that David mentioned. I think collaboration and building connections with the different organizations and communities is essential, and social media and different platforms is also essential. As David mentioned, collaborating with local schools like my own, Sonoma Valley High School, is important to make sure that we're getting input from a wide range of ages, and that can also help us connect with different parents throughout the city of Sonoma. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kendall. So at this point, we're going to more public comment on.
Correct, yeah, just to be consistent.
On the
Just this one.
on the engagement network presentation and ideas that the ad hoc community engagement team has put forth. We're now open up to public comment on that topic. Mr. Hoyt, thank you.
I just feel like, I mean, there's a great list of partners that you were expecting to work with. And the one thing that I've been realizing recently is how important it's going to be for us to have union membership buy-in. It'd be great to know what the stances are for the Teamsters, for for the every union that's involved in the city. They need to be. We need to understand if there is an existing policy for these organizations. If they're I mean, they're going to just dig in their heels, or are they miles ahead? So.
Thank you. Very important. Other public comments? Matthew, anything online?
There are currently no members of the public online on Zoom right now.
Other members of the public on the community engagement process as presented by the ad hoc? Going once, twice, 3 times? Looks like we're ready to move on. That will take us now to the commission discussion of all 5 proposals from the ad hoc, and basically moving us toward what we're going to be bringing forth officially to the city council.
So, yes, Chairman, what I'd recommend is just to explain what that process is going to be. Mm-hmm. Then you open it up for public comment, and then if you want to debate, discuss, or put forth a motion. Mm-hmm.
I imagine that this process will include the commissioners presenting recommendations, motions with second, to move particular recommended items and their budgets to the council for action. and we'll have that discussion, and then there'll be further public input into what they've been hearing in the way of those recommendations. We have the option of doing it by theme to avoid too much confusion. It might be easier to go back through the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sequence. I would solicit thoughts from my fellow commissioners rather than jumping back and forth between transportation and engagement and over to sequestration and carbon offset credits, though across the board. I think it might be efficient to go one at a time through each of them in the same sequence we've had them this evening, if I have general approval on that.
May I just make
Yes,
a
sir.
recommendation? I think the commission knows what the next steps and the end result, but the public probably doesn't. So just a suggestion is, what's the end result here to help?
Well, the end
educate the
result is to have a series of recommendations from this commission adopted by voting that will go forth to the city council for, there'll be a presentation. There is a specific date. It's not in my notes at the moment. It's in May, I believe, and we're already in mid-April nearly. So it's coming up in the next month that will include specific action items about climate action and related budget requests that would go to the council for discussion and hopefully approval by at least 3 members of the city council. Is that clear enough? That's kind of my sense of what happens next. Vice Chair
Through the chair.
Conlon.
Yes. I'm hoping maybe before we get public comment that the commissioners could ask some clarifying questions. It's possible that in the discussion of the answers to those questions that there will be, we'll have content that the public will want to feedback on as well. So I'm hoping to get a little more clarity before we hear from the public again. I don't think that might take us long, but hopefully we can avoid debating the issues and simply ask clarifying questions.
Of course, clarification is always central to moving forward successfully. So with that, I'll get it on. With that preamble, the first item is transportation and specific recommendations for action in the arena of transportation is open for discussion.
I have. One of the things that is a concern is the parking around the plaza. And now, SMART isn't going to be coming over to Napa anytime soon, but we could do a streetcar down to Vicksburg or to one of these communities that where SMART will be along and do tourist parking. And then the trolley can come in, pick them up, and bring them into the square. And we put in car parking meters that are free to the residents but are costly to the visitors. So that would be a thought.
The issue of parking on the plaza and the related issue of climate smart tourism are in fact later on this agenda for further discussion. So thanks for bringing that up. It's obviously a critical issue in the process of what we're going to be doing with transportation, and it tends to something else that relates to that is affordable housing in this city, and the city's already beginning to move in that arena so that employees who work here, more of them can live here and not driving all the way in from other lower cost residential areas. Are there other thoughts on the transportation recommendations?
I guess I had a clarifying question for staff, in that the materials or the information I read from the county at the beginning of the transportation discussion, I think there was a $7,000 to $9,000 budget line item for sidewalk gap analyses. So I'm thinking that that might be, maybe reduce the budget request from 75 to 9,000 to be sure we have adequate budget there to do a pretty good job of assessing the sidewalk infrastructure in Sonoma when we do that plan in coordination with the county. But do you think staff would anticipate other expenses we're not anticipating at this time? I don't want to lowball this and underestimate. And maybe tonight's just recommendation, and that decision can be more fully discussed at City Council. But just wondering if we could, if there's, you know, I know this is hard to ask. We're all throwing numbers at the sky here.
I don't know. Part of it is certainly the climate action plan. Those were very approximate numbers, and the expectation would be if selecting some of those is to hone in and be more specific. But that's a discussion in that particular instance would have to involve Public Works
Right.
for a potential recommended budget.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I did lay out, you know, a number of plans that presumably are in scope for what a public works director considers to be their priorities, to be sure that the city can qualify for, you know, these grants that the other cities have already qualified for. So, and I realize you're in a information deficit without having a planning director to refer to answer such a question right now. So maybe, you know, I started the meeting off saying $75,000, then I went to 0. I just proposed 9. I'm feeling like maybe we need to put a placeholder in for public works staff or consulting support to be sure that we don't misinform the other commissioners about what this could be. That strikes me as, even though it's fully funded at the county level, that doesn't mean that it's fully funded inside of staff in Sonoma, and I appreciate that concern. So maybe I will amend, with the approval of my co-chair ad hoc, or with the, I guess frankly at this point, the rest of the commission, that the transportation budget request should be, let's say, half of the original 75,000 request, at least for starting discussions around what our priorities are across the rest of the commission. Does that seem like a reasonable way to proceed? So I don't need to have a formal
So
decision.
what is the budget you're considering?
So we initially said 75. You had raised, you had raised it to 275 with a very specific ask to include a feasibility study for a streetcar. I think that when we should actually, my recommendation at this time is just for clarification purposes. I'm going to be proposing that $38,000 budget line item for the program that I presented in the presentation. I think we should entertain yours as a separate proposal.
Yeah, I agree.
Very good. And then we can also, those are so basically 2 competing transportation proposals coming out of the ad hoc is the way I'm going to frame that. Thank you for the clarification. Appreciate the time to do that just now.
Further commentary from the commissioners on this topic? Commissioner Ward.
So I just want to make sure I have the idea of the budget super clear. So there were 4 total recommendations presented. The first one was the 2 bands, which we already established was just like minimal staff time. Recommendation 2 is basically the one that is the main amendment of the 30 whatever K.
Right.
And then recommendation 3 was to pursue grant opportunities, which is another staff time only. And then recommendation 4, which is exploring a shuttle, will be the 200,000, correct?
Thank you, Amber. That actually, I think, does. Would you agree, Alan, that phrasing that that you are adding 200 to the numbers that I have presented. So what Amber just gave us is a line item on the shuttle of 200,000 for
200,000 of the seller?
$200,000 to explore the shuttle, which in my original draft, I had $0 allocated. You added 200 to that line item, and so we'll be able to think
Well,
of
I'm
those.
combining a couple of things in terms of parking issues. Sorry. In terms of parking issues and in terms of the streetcar. And so, you know, this is kind of rushed. And we kind of need to think this thing through a little more. And so that's what concerns me, is that we're getting these deadlines to go make commitments, and we really haven't had adequate time to really research and think some of this stuff.
I would certainly agree with that, but sometimes that happens. There's a budget timeline with the city council. This commission and its predecessor commission that Mr. Metzler and I both served on, Ed, Mr. Conlon, was often in the audience with us, didn't have any access to any budget activity, just talk, as Greta Thunberg says about climate, blah, blah, blah. So we got an opportunity now to ask for budget, and we're not gonna miss that opportunity to at least do a good ask. So I think at this point, I would recommend, I would request a motion from a commissioner on the topic of transportation recommendations and related budgets.
I was actually hoping to ask a few more clarifying questions of the other ad hocs, so that I would have clear in my mind the priorities of those other groups before I would commit to, you know, in the case of transportation, that's the one I've already the most aware of, but I have a number of other questions about the other groups. So if we could have more clarifying questions of the other areas, I think that would be helpful to me at this point.
We can do that. I want to make sure we stay on track a bit, but what you're suggesting is before we do any motions to move forward, we have any other clarifying conversation on the other four topics, even though we had that opportunity earlier. We can reopen that opportunity. We did it after each one, but it's a good time now to refresh our minds as we get closer to getting real here with moving forward with recommendations to City Council.
I didn't ask any question about buildings or water or carbon or waste or outreach. So I'm hoping just to ask some clarifying questions so that I understand what the presentations were about.
I'd like you to be fully comfortable as we move forward, and we're still only 2 hours in. I was afraid we'd be more at 10 o'clock at this point, so we're only at 8. It's only 11 in New York, so we're still on board. So from Commissioner Conlon and then others, other clarifying questions before we start to get focused in on recommendations.
Do you want to go through each one of the items? And because I have only one set of questions.
Yeah, I thought we were starting with transportation, but it sounds like Tom wants to cover all of them before we go back into actually doing detailed recommendations.
Why don't we go, I think we've done
Let's-
transportation, let's go to buildings.
Have we finished with transportation at this point in terms of these clarifying questions?
I'm not quite clear on where we are at transportation. You know, the thing that I'm concerned about is with parking meters, parking spaces, trolley. This is a very complex entity and not something we can just rush into. So I would hold back on any kind of thing for that.
Thank you. Other comments and commentary on transportation as a topic, that ad hoc and its presentation? Hearing none, let's move to buildings and solid waste. Specific questions on that.
I really enjoyed that presentation on buildings and solid waste. I saw your budget breakdown, and I was curious where how that, I think maybe David Leland's public comment on more specificity being necessary. I'm wondering what you went into your ad hoc's thinking about the division of monies between those four areas, in particular the benchmarking. We didn't talk about benchmarking, for example, for the city buildings, the city's owns facilities. Presumably it could be in the existing audit reports, or it could be an appendage to the future audit reports that we're recommending. But I'm curious, what, more specifically, what you have in mind for a benchmarking program for the cities. I think it's primarily commercial buildings.
It's probably best to start with benchmarking with someone who does it for professional, on a professional level, to help us understand how it is done. And that's what I estimated would be the cost to have some professional advice on benchmarking.
Okay, that's helpful, because I was wondering if you had like a specific, something more specific than that. And then on solid waste, you mentioned dramatic reductions in the last 5 years, and were you citing locally or state sort of level stats?
Those were in the draft climate action plan, and it's local.
Okay, thank you. Go sloppy on my waste. Thank you. That's all I have on those items.
Other questions on the buildings and solid waste from other commissioners?
I wish I would have taken more diligent notes at this point. I have a note just saying that I needed help understanding the budget for the solid waste aspect. I feel like that one was a bit fuzzier for me to understand as well, so I don't know if that would be something that we'd be able to look at again at all. I can find the report as well, so that way I have that reference.
Actually, the report I did not put the budget in. It was in the PowerPoint.
That's why.
Okay, so that's why it's confusing. And if you, can we pull that PowerPoint back up and go to the last slide?
I didn't write it down either.
Not trying to sneak anything past anybody. Water, there we go. Thank you. Water bottle, water coffee containers, water bottle filling stations, and education. I accepted the estimate of the staff, and the same with public recycling and organics. That would be mostly putting up the recyclable containers for people to use, and to educate people to use them for organics. And so that's 60 grand. One of the other recommendations that made some sense, but at this point, I'm not sure that I understand how the discounts would be applied to composting equipment. I think it would depend. We'd have to come up with a program parameters to discuss who gets discounted composting equipment and who doesn't. So again, I took the staff recommendation on that.
Thank you, that helped. So basically, line 1, the 30K, is for recommendation 1 of solid waste, of increased organic segregation, and then line 2 is recommendation 2 of basically our diligence on single-use containers. Or is it?
Well, actually, the public recycling organics is the one, it's related to one, it's just a little more specific. Some of the items have like multiple components, like with the solar, for example, when we talked about batteries, it's all hand in glove. Okay.
Other comments and questions on the buildings and solid waste? I had a couple of thoughts on this to add to what I'd heard earlier. I'm intrigued with the possibility of savings through multi-dwelling solar electric systems instead of requiring individual homes, particularly in a cul-de-sac where you can have huge efficiencies of cost by sharing a solar system across 5-10 homes in a cul-de-sac and make much more efficient use of this. And I think that's something important to look at and see if it's feasible, if it means we have to be off the grid because you never get PG&E even with Sonoma Clean Power to agree, but at least it ought to be pursued as a way to accelerate solar use in a community like this one. And secondly, I did want to note, we've had already at this point interesting discussions about solar in the Sonoma City mobile home community. One of my personal issues, and I know it's shared by some and hopefully all commissioners and maybe hopefully all in the public this evening, is climate equity. That this process not all be for those folks who live on East Side Sonoma, but include the broader range of Sonoma residents, including the 400 or so mobile homes that are within the city of Sonoma. One of our public activists, who's not unfortunately here tonight, Michael Hefferty, has been working with me personally to outreach to the mobile home community and is looking at solar systems and some federal grants that might work. So it's just something for us to know as we think about the buildings.
Okay, so point of
session.
clarification, is we asking questions now, or are we going to make comments as well?
These are questions and comments.
Then I guess the answer
I
is.
guess the question would be, did anybody else know about it? I can rephrase it as a question.
Okay, no, I actually I've thought about it, so I just didn't write it up.
So I think we are now able to move on to water and carbon sequestration. Any questions?
I have a question about carbon sequestration.
Yes, sir.
And,
Please proceed.
and it's to you, because obviously you know a lot about the biochar, but my experience with biochar has been basically as a soil nutrient in agriculture and with EPA as a way to control lead contamination and to remediate contaminated soils. And I never really understood it as a way to sort of grab carbon out of the air, and I don't think that's one of the intents to
That's
do
not
it.
anything in the proposal is nothing to do, other than the one public commenter, nothing I said talked about grabbing it out of the air. It's an offset. It's a pound for pound.
So I'm
ton
getting to
for
my
ton
question
offset.
now. Okay, my question is,
Your question is?
you had specific places that you had proposed its use. What is the basis of why you chose those areas, and how much do you want to do in those areas, and what effect will the biochar have in those areas? I think we owe it to people to.
Of course, those are very important questions, not all of which can be answered definitively at this point. The locations were chosen primarily because they're city-owned, so it does not require further detailed negotiation with private landowners or the county or the state. There's lots of interesting land in the state ownership, but we left that off the recommendation of the ad hoc. With respect to how much and exactly where, there are essentially two answers to that. At the entry points, there would be the small demonstration units, 6 foot square, 8 foot square, that would have a small amount of biochar for purposes of demonstration and some signage that would help the public understand carbon offsets. These are offsets by pounds and tons. They're not grabbing carbon dioxide out of the air like a direct air capture system. That's not what it does. This is pure carbon, elemental carbon, being sequestered underground so it doesn't escape into the atmosphere literally for millennia. The studies show, the research shows, thousands of studies. So how much would be driven by detailed plans that would look, for example, at Montini Preserve? Other than the entry point, if you know Montini, there's a particular entry point where you go through a little double fencing that I guess keeps animals from easily getting through. And at that point, there'd be the demonstration item. In the larger, much larger area up near the water tanks and so on, this is driven by the types of native plants that are there. It's driven by the kinds of advantages we could provide with the biochar and compost in certain plants versus biochar only in areas that are basically just grass fairly deep, and ease of access, because costs are driven, as you would well imagine, by the ease of access to that. All that requires detailed study well beyond what the ad hoc could do at this point. So those are the kinds of issues that get resolved as we move forward with this initiative that hasn't been done before.
So is the budget you propose to do a study, or is it to actually do the biochar application? And if it's to do the biochar application, what is your expected reduction in carbon?
It's the answer to the first part of the question, Philip, is both. We're proposing detailed plans at these locations. That's the study piece. With respect to the demonstration signage, public information piece, that's direct application of small amounts of biochar, probably in the level of 6 by 6 underground, probably in the neighborhood of 300 pounds, maybe 400 pounds of elemental carbon underground, probably 5 feet underground at that location. The plan would define much more in the way of biochar, depending on what the plan concluded in the study. The sequestration amounts that offset 2030 or whatever year it goes in, emissions are at about 2.4 to 1 according to worldwide research pounds. So if we put in 500 pounds, that would be 1,200 pounds of carbon offset to be credited against emissions in that year.
When you calculated the budget, what did that include?
The budget includes some staff and consultant time to do the plans and to begin to develop federal funding for the rest of the process, probably out of the Inflation Reduction Act and potentially out of the infrastructure law, the new there are elements of both that can be applied for through grants in order to expand the process significantly.
So can you remind me what the budget amount was?
I'd have to look it up myself. It is not in my head. Trying to run a meeting while running an ad hoc gets to be complicated. So it's in here. Water and Carbon Ad Hoc requests a city budget of $40,000 to begin to implement our Carbon One GHG recommendations on the city properties. These funds will be used to support efforts by city staff, plus assistance from local nonprofits to identify, apply for, and receive appropriate federal, state grant monies and/or seek support from local donors. We have one local donor up in George Ranch in mind who's been very active in biochar, for example. That's not written. We estimate total costs for this effective new climate action carbon sequestration program on city properties will range from $34,000 to $180,000. And there's a footnote with 7 locations and specific dollar amounts on each.
34 to 104?
Oh, 34 to 184. I've got Plaza 4,000, Depot Park 5,000, Montini 4,000 for the model plot, plus 50,000 for sequestration. You're beginning to see the response to your question about the sequencing here and so on. The Sonoma Garden Park, 4,000 for the model plot, plus 25,000 for sequestration. And it's similar numbers at Nathanson Creek and the Friar Creek Carter Park. That's how you get this gap from one side to another. Those are excellent questions. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
Other questions about the water and carbon sequestration ad hoc proposals?
I have questions. So while we're on the carbon, I think we'll start there. You said in perpetuity in the ground. The carbon can be stored in perpetuity. And my understanding is that carbon cycles through the land, through soils. And so are you saying that biochar somehow is not bioaccessible to anything that uses carbon Or is that
Yes.
something I don't understand?
Exactly.
It's not,
It is not soil organic carbon as normally defined. It enhances soil organic carbon through various mechanisms biologically, but the carbon itself remains essentially in perpetuity. There's very little degradation that's going on with the underground carbon.
forgive me, but very little and in perpetuity it's, to me at least, seem to be at odds. You know, that there
Well,
is a degradation factor.
There
in
appears to be essentially no degradation for the periods of time we've been able to study. There are elements out of Brazil where it's been there for several thousand years. Perpetuity, of course, is longer than you and I will live, and even my mother didn't make it that long. So, but we're looking at thousands of years for properly manufactured elemental carbon called biochar, produced at about 700 degrees centigrade in a proper unit. And this is not to do with carbon offset credits to plant trees in the Amazon that might well burn or be cut down by the next lumber crowd or hamburger hunters, but it's buried in perpetuity. With or without compost, those are the issues that the plans begin to look at as to whether you want to use it for further increasing soil organic carbon beyond the initial, but the carbon itself of the biochar remains literally in perpetuity, thousands of years or millennia.
Okay,
Never, not forever, but millennia.
okay. So, you said in your presentation that it would be offsetting the emissions that can't be eliminated by 2030. And so we're still going to be, so in effect, these units are in fact, an equal number of units are going to be in the atmosphere anyway. And would you be also, in addition to, for the purposes of Sonoma's balance, our 2030 goal of reducing emissions to zero, would we also be
Net zero.
well, net to net zero? Would we also be would you be allowing other carbon credits to be counted against those units of sequestered carbon under this proposed plan?
I'm not sure the question is clear, but let me try to deal with it. I'm not suggesting that this would offset all remaining emissions. We're not likely to be able to do that. My guess is we won't meet our target.
Let me simplify my question.
For every 100 pounds in the ground, we're exactly offsetting 100 pounds of those remaining emissions.
Forgive me. Let me try to restate and simplify my question. Would you be accepting commercial carbon credits through a registry?
Not
from another
proposed.
party?
That is one of our other proposals that I chose not to, with my ad hoc, chose not to bring forward at this point because of the controversial aspects of both the voluntary market and the compulsory markets that exist globally at Puro and others. I'm well aware of those markets. We made it as one of our proposals and then backed it off because there's only so much you can bring forward, and I'd love to bring this forward with much more confidence of how well it's going to work.
Understood. And
It's not clear to me, are you going to be extracting carbon out of the air with the machines? Or are you just...
Absolutely not. Picture this. We have urban wastes being trimmed in Vallejo and Richmond and so on by a company called A Plus Tree. A local nonprofit is associated with them in a CAL FIRE project. Those wastes are now going to landfill where they deteriorate and become pure carbon emissions over time. It varies depending on which landfill and the characteristics of the wood, but it all ends up in the air as carbon.
Yeah, that's...
Let me finish, please.
Sure.
By running that waste through pyrolysis, it will no longer degrade like that. It remains in a carbon-centric form in smaller amounts. You lose some in the pyrolysis process. Those are the gases driven off, but the physical amounts of the wood remain. One of the fascinating things is that it comes out totally black and totally shaped like what went in. I've seen acorns that have been pyrolyzed, and it's incredible. It's still an acorn. It's been at 700 degrees centigrade in the absence of oxygen. It's not combustion, and it's a pure acorn. You see it. I'd love to do some artwork with this over time. So hopefully that answers your question as to whether this stuff falls apart.
So 700 degrees?
Centigrade. Inside a stainless steel canister.
That requires a fair amount of energy, doesn't it?
It requires a small amount of propane to start, and then the wood itself produces the energy for continuing. And you run it through an air pollution control device, so there are essentially zero emissions on the back end.
So if I can continue with
sir.
a few more
Of
questions.
course.
And forgive me for not having the report in front of me to be more facile with, but you said 300 pounds underground 5 feet and a 2.4 to 1 ratio of sequestration value.
Correct.
And I'm confused because what you just said was that when you do the pyrolysis process, you burn off, volatilize a fair amount of the original sequestered carbon that was in the wood input or the wood.
burn off the gases that are in there, and you end up with the elemental carbon.
So you're saying no carbon is lost in the process. The carbon.
Essentially no carbon. I wouldn't ever say no carbon is lost. There'll be leakage in any of these systems. But if you start with 1,000 pounds of wood in a properly conducted pyrolysis machine, you'll end up with about 280 to 300 of elemental carbon left after you've driven off all the impurities.
All right. In the interest of time, I'm not going to force all of us to go through a longer 101 discussion. And then I want to move on then, unless others want to talk about carbon. Well, actually, I do have one more thing on biochar, and that has to do with your relationship with the Ecology Center and its equipment and your role on this commission. Have you contemplated that there are or could be some perception of conflicts of interest, and have you considered that in making this proposal to this body?
Yes, I have, and I will recuse myself from official votes as we move forward. I'm certainly able to answer your questions as a certified specialist in this field. And for those who don't know, Tom is reflecting the fact that I am president of the board of directors of Sonoma Ecology Center. I left my other hat at home, or maybe it's back here. No, it's in the car, which says Sonoma Ecology Center. And I'm also senior director of our climate activities at the Sonoma Ecology Center.
Thank you.
So I'd have to recuse myself from any official votes that touch on any of this.
Okay, I appreciate you stating
I think the
that.
council understood this when they appointed me.
Well, I didn't understand it until I asked it just now, so I appreciate you clarifying that. And then I do have a question about Miyawaki forests, and I've never heard of this, but I'm intrigued by it.
Welcome
and
aboard.
It sounds like these are not an indigenous plant to this area, and I wonder about
No. They're entirely native plants.
They're entirely native.
Entirely native plants. That's the idea. That in Japan you're using Japanese native plants. In North Carolina you're using et cetera.
Perfect. Thank you for your
the King of Siam, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you for alleviating my ignorance.
Other comments on the water and carbon ad hoc presentations?
Again,
Yes,
are
sir.
we doing questions now or comments? Because we started off doing questions. Because I have a comment, but I don't know if you want to entertain it now or not.
Yeah, we all have comments still.
Okay, these are, we're still in questions.
Okay.
These are called technical questions as part of the structure that we sometimes go through. Questions. no more questions on the water and carbon, then the next topic in the list is government ops. Questions, not comments, on government ops. Going once, twice? Mr. Conlon? Commissioner Conlon? Nope. All right. I believe we're reached our point of discussion on government ops, and we have 5. Any questions on the public engagement ad hoc presentation?
I think I wanted a point of clarification just to make sure I understand. Because it seemed like it was presented as a separate topic altogether. You know, it was the community engagement ad hoc was almost its own entity because it is an umbrella over all our other ad hocs. I promise this is a technical question.
We're not going to nitpick you.
Is the actual proposal and plan of the community engagement one of the 4 that we have to pull from? Is that what I'm understanding in addition to the 4?
One of the 5. We have 5 ad hocs. They're all bringing presentations forward. We separated out community engagement because it supports the work of the other 4, but it deserves its own attention in terms of going forth to the council with the concept and the budget that we have proposed. That's at least my understanding.
To your question, Commissioner Ward, the explanation was that the Climate Action Commission will have to present a total of up to 4 total climate actions. So, and the discussion that we had was that public engagement was treated differently because they're not climate actions per se, but it's overall engagement to improve public engagement with the climate action plan itself over time. So it was just viewed slightly different, but there's still a budget request and so forth.
Thank you.
Now we're ready to move, and I'm open to more questions, not seeing any eager participants for more questions. We're now moving to discussion and comments leading to motions and voting.
And before you do a motion, you'll need to open it up to public comment.
And is it your sense we'll do a motion one by one on each topic or on all 5? All 5.
Would be the recommendation. Yeah.
Just fine.
So you
That
should
move us
actually,
along a little
so you
better.
should actually open it up to public comment now, and then you do a motion and then discuss and debate that.
The motion would be by item, basically. We're going to need a whole series of motions.
When are the public comments?
Now, we're now opening it up to public comments concerning the ad hoc recommendations.
Leo McCloskey again. On the outreach, one of the things, I was on the Transition Towns, Bill McGibbon. You know, there's somebody here in town who founded 350.org. You know, I'm watching all the climate things go on as having spent a whole career in, you know, working as an ecologist applied to the wine industry. And one of the things I can tell you is that the world around this public outreach, the business world, is firmly, very American, against accepting climate change. All the trade organizations, every single trade organization is against even talking about it. So I think reaching around, we're in the ag zone here. We're in the last ring around a city, as David Brooks would say in the book on Paradise Drive. So here we are out here. People are coming out here. It's a chance to affect the world who lives in the city. There are more people there than living north as you drive north from here. And if we could do something to engage the agricultural industry, it would be great to get an outreach to that. And you have all the winery tasting rooms, and they want to be greenwashed by what we're doing. And so we might, I don't think it's cynical. I think we could ask them, would they like to step up to the plate and greenwash their businesses on the plaza and the vineyards around here by getting involved in the public outreach and being an example. So I think that's one thing. I think like Steve Ledson would do it. There are people like that who would really jump for this. And I think it'd be worthwhile to go see 12 winery owners and winery, especially those who own a vineyard. So anyway, I would say that. I don't know if you've thought about that. No?
Well, the Sonoma Vintners and Growers is one of the partner groups that's identified. We're under specific instructions, as I've understood them, from the council and the staff of the city, that this effort is to focus within the city. That even my blundering effort to reach out to Maxwell Park through the county is a bit out of the range of the city itself. So there aren't a lot of vineyards operating within the city limits.
But there are a lot of wine companies.
And they're prime targets.
Yeah.
Prime targets, the tasting rooms, the restaurants that purvey a fair amount of expensive wine are prime targets for outreach to tourists, of course.
Stone Edge Farms would be, they're right there next to Del Santina. That would be one.
Sure.
The other thing I keep coming back to the biochar. If you're going to have offsets, I start to think of Silicon Valley Bank. Silicon Valley Bank is bankrupt because they did offsets. They ran a hedge fund themselves.
We're not doing offsets in the way that you're mentioning it.
I know, but you said offset.
We are offsetting. It is a verb, not a noun.
Let me just, you're selling me. And just, no offense, but you're selling it. I sell too. If
I'm explaining it, not selling anything. There's no cash sale.
Well,
it's an explanation when you're incorrect in your use of the word offsets.
You use the word offsets.
I use the word offsetting. It's a different word than offsets.
Okay, offsetting. If we were going to be in the business of offsetting, and we look at Silicon Valley Bank, they bought bonds at the wrong rate, and then the value of the offsetting went up when the Treasury released bonds at 5%, they went bankrupt. So we want to be able to get our value for this biochar. We want to step back and look at the money that's going in from biochar. Just for a moment, it doesn't go into biochar. It goes into another financial vehicle. And it was mentioned, have we looked into to some other way to buy carbon offsets? Offsetting, we are there. Is there another opportunity that we could take and pause the biochar? Because it's a couple 100,000. Pretty soon it could be 250,000, 185,000. How much? That's a lot. I mean, it's worth looking at that one more round possibly. Maybe some very small look should be made here at the budget so that we could have an opportunity to choose between biochar and a carbon offset that's available from a publicly held company, that if it didn't work, at least we could sell that publicly held product. It's a financial product that's sold in New York by the New York Stock Exchange, something like this, or something that Gavin Newsom might be up to in this area. He's very interested in this. So I think it's worthwhile for the city to look at the option of offsetting, the world of offsetting in terms of the fiduciary aspect, not just the biochar, but so that we know that this money is going into an offsetting project. That's what it's about. It's not about fertilization. It's not about capturing carbon. It's not about the things that they're doing in Napa with biochar. It's a whole distinct and unique use that you're going to make of it to the city. So the money that is going to be spent, I think we should tip up some kind of look at some other opportunity. So that's my question. I don't know, would that be a good idea? Or would you be against that?
I'm advocating the use of biochar.
Would you allow a period, a pause?
Why?
Well, for the
Because
for the
I know what
producer,
I'm
yeah.
talking about. There's years of work in this. There's a lot of work even in your wineries. You should listen to the winemaker talks that have been given about all of this. And we're not interested at the moment in carbon offsets. We're interested in carbon in the ground.
Let me read from The Guardian. None of this is to suggest that the idea has no virtues, simply that they are outweighed by the hazards, which the promoters have overlooked or obscured. Nor does this mean that charcoal can't be made on a small scale from material that would otherwise go to waste, but the idea that biochar is a universal solution that can be safely deployed on a vast scale is as misguided as Mao Zedong's great leap backwards. And they go on. I mean,
Charming. And I could have brought hundreds of articles that contrary that.
Right.
Thank you for your input. I
Okay.
believe your 3 minutes is well exceeded.
Good evening. I just wanted to thank you for all your work. And I, as a veteran, as David knows, a veteran of years of work on the Community Services and Environment Commission, I just really wanted to encourage to offer a little bit of cautionary note about the extensive work we did on the Community Services and Environment Commission that never seemed to go anywhere. And I just really wanted to encourage this commission to take action tonight, to pass a resolution tonight, because I have been to so many meetings where there was talk and there's talk and we needed further study and then it never happens. So I hope that that happens. I also I have read extensively on the topic of drawdown and reducing in zero carbon future, and the many books I've read on the topic speak very highly of the use of biochar. The city passed a climate emergency resolution. It is a climate emergency. The only solution is any and all of these strategies. So arguing about well, I shouldn't say argue. Discussion about the relative merits of one strategy versus another. How long biochar is it sequestering carbon in the soil for a century, a millennia, an eon is not the point. The point is we need to take action. Biochar, from what I've read, is one of many very effective solutions, and I hope to see that this commission takes action on these measures tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Other comments from the public at this point? Seeing none, we will close public comment and move to,
Through
do you
the
have
chair,
anything on the online folks, Matthew?
I did want to say
Yes, sir.
that there are no members of the public
There.
currently on Zoom.
Right, okay, good to know, too bad, but good to know. So at this point, we're ready to move to commission action on one or more of the proposals. It sounds like we should simply move through them in the same order in which we've discussed them before. So I would entertain a motion, should there be one, in the area of transportation as a recommendation moving forward to the City Council.
I move we accept the report of the subcommittee.
Could be that the full report and its budget recommendations and so on.
Should we plan to move forward with one of the individual items if we see them fit to bring to the council?
That's what I understand we're doing. We're approving at this point, moving forward with individual items to the council. I believe we're under some guidance to not bring in a large number of recommendations. We're supposed to have maximum of 4. Within transportation, is that 1 or is that multiple against our 4? That is a question. I know we've moved past questions,
it's
but I'm
okay.
asking a question.
I would like to form a motion.
Please use your microphone.
Forgive me, point of order. Philip, did you not make a motion?
I did.
Philip made a motion, so there's a motion on the floor.
Oh, sorry.
And so,
There is.
Philip, if you could restate that motion for us, please?
That, my motion was that we accept the subcommittee report on transportation as presented with the recommendations.
Is there a second for this motion?
There were two budget recommendations that were not internally presented consistently. So there was 2 competing transportation presentations. There was the one, actually there's 3. There's the one that's written and in the public record. There is my modified version of that, which was $38,000 for all 4 measures. And then there was the modification, if I will, of that, which was instead of a 0 line item for the streetcar, I think it's called e-shuttle, for a $200,000 line item for that one item. So which of those things, or all of them, do you wish to make as part of your transportation?
That's a fair
Tom-
question. My
Tom,
my
how about, no,
motion
Let's
is
hear an answer here.
as presented by you, which would be the second.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
and Tom, the item that I would want to do for the streetcars, it would be 3.2, climate smart tourism and parking in Sonoma.
We're not at that part of the agenda yet, Ellen. That's coming later.
I'm sorry?
We're not at that part of the agenda yet on 3.2.
I'm just saying that I want to withdraw that from,
I got you. Yes. That can be postponed to subsequent discussion, either tonight if we have the energy, or with a special meeting in 2 weeks if we don't.
that's fine.
So let's go back then. We have a motion and a second for 2 items, not the third, that were recommended by the Transportation Ad Hoc.
Who did the second?
No, there are 2 items. I guess there hasn't been a second on this motion yet. Those were still in the area of technical questions.
So thank you. So I understand that there's a motion on the floor to approve, it's a transportation-specific motion. My understanding was that Travis was suggesting we make a single motion to indicate our priorities to City Council. And while it may be helpful to go through on a step-by-step basis to say, we like this set of your ad hocs report, we like this one, we like this one, then have a summary motion. That, I think, was staff's intention, and I would be okay with that. I would also be okay with a, I guess, like a stepwise process where we did make a formal vote and a roll call vote for each of the ad hoc areas, as long as we have a chance to come back later and revisit what we were actually recommending to the City Council.
I think that makes more sense. We want to get the items that we like and want to recommend, and if it's more than the council funnel can accept at this point, then we'll come back and whittle it down through votes until we have it down to the right number.
So, Philip, with a friendly amendment, if you would entertain, would you entertain amendments to your motion in the form of specific other line items for the other ad hocs, and then a final roll call vote? Or would you prefer to stick to your original motion and have us proceed in that manner?
It seems to me the smart way to do it is to have everybody agree on each subcommittee recommendation or disagree, so that we know when we do a vote on all of the items, we know what the temperature of the group is and whether it's going to be acceptable.
I think that's a better way to set priorities. So it's almost like an initial vote and then a final vote. So on a tentative basis, in the arena of transportation, is there a recommendation on the floor?
I will second the motion of Mr. Henneman.
Can we have clarity as to what this specific recommendation is?
I'm going to ask
As we
Commissioner
come back.
Conlon, because he's very much more familiar than I
Yes.
am with this, but what he presented to us is what I
Yeah.
had supported.
I think,
It's a
Tom, we
lower
need to
dollar
come
amount.
back to a little bit of specifics here instead of what I said before.
Travis, if you could pull back up the transportation to help everybody with this. So as you recall, in the transportation plan recommendations, we had four specific requests. The first one was a no-cost request to ban by ordinance new gas stations and drive-through windows. And that has amazingly come and gone through this body without much discussion, which I find actually elating because it's been well debated all throughout the county. But so that was the first item that would be included in the Transportation Committee's requests. The second item was, oh, thank you. I see what you're saying. The second item was to leverage the existing funding for adequate planning, parking, bike paths, pedestrian safety improvements, etc. And we we're modifying the written request for an additional $38,000 to support staff at staff's discretion in achieving the integration of all of those plans. The third request is to pursue EV charging grants, but there's no specific budget associated with that. And the fourth is to explore the feasibility of a downtown shuttle. And the motion on the floor is to explore that, but without any designated budget to do so. And so that's the proposal on the floor, and it's, I guess, an up or down vote at this point. So my understanding.
The budget, though, would be
30. Thank you. 38,000 instead of 75,000 is shown on the slide in front of us right now.
For item 2 out of 4.
And that's only for item 2 out of 4. That's not to be fungible to the other categories. Thank you.
So we do have a motion, and we do have a second. Is there further discussion of this motion to adopt these four, tentatively at this point, until we whittle, to adopt these 4 climate action items for proposal to the City Council? Commission discussion of this? Hearing none, I believe we're ready for a vote on this.
Commissioner Heinerman,
aye.
Commissioner Nickel,
Aye.
Commissioner Ward,
Aye.
Vice Chair Conlon,
Aye.
and Chair Morrell.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Next, we're moving to buildings and solid waste, where we had hours ago some specific recommendations. That's front and center in your all minds, but not in mine. So if somebody, one of the commissioners would remind us from the ad hoc what we're proposing in the arena of buildings and solid waste.
You have it on your screen now, and talked about it, so it's 45,000 total for the 4 bulleted points.
For purposes of moving this along, I will make a motion to approve as presented tonight by Mr. Heinerman. Commissioner Heinerman.
Do I hear a second on Commissioner Conlon's motion?
I will second.
Second from Commissioner Nickel. Is there further discussion of this motion to approve these 4 items with their budgets at a total of 45,000? Seeing exhaustion rather than intensity, I will ask for a vote.
Commissioner Heinerman,
Aye.
Commissioner Nickel,
Aye.
Commissioner Ward,
Aye.
Vice Chair Conlon,
Aye.
and Chair Morrell.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
We're moving next to the controversial arena of water and carbon sequestration. We have a series of recommendations. I believe it boiled down to 3, though at this point we're...
I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt real quick. We still
Yes,
have
ma'am.
solid waste.
Buildings and solid waste, we keep moving. Thank you.
You're just really excited about your biochar.
It's a solid waste issue. So the proposals on solid waste, may we see them? I'm also eager about trees. So what we have in the solid waste arena is a proposal with a proposed budget of $100K and 3 items shown here on the screens.
I have a clarifying question. We heard from a number of people tonight about concerns about enforcement. And how much of any, if any of this would be dedicated to enforcement? Is that anticipated?
I'll answer that because I'm on the committee, but in this proposal, as in all the other proposals, it's not about enforcement. We have money in a budget to enforce the law. And we don't need to put it in our budget because if it's really an issue of a lack of enforcement that we already have budgeted in other programs in the city. So I don't think it's appropriate.
Thank you for the clarification.
Other questions or comments about this topic?
Yeah, I'll have a comment on the discounted composting equipment, if I may. That strikes me as a difficult thing to set up for a small city in a very cost-effective way. Having set up many incentive programs to encourage procurement of efficient equipment or emerging technologies, I would prefer to see, and I think it would be much more cost-effective if a function like that were to be launched by Zero Waste Sonoma or Recology or even our own local garbage company, if they, I guess they don't have other places to amortize costs across either. So it strikes me as being not the greatest kind of, a difficult return on investment, and it could be a lot of trouble. That's my personal comment on that one line item, although it's not a bad idea.
I do agree. I know that Philip was threw it in there, but I knew you were a bit less into that one. So I think maybe that could be one that could be explored later because it is a great idea. But I don't know if we want to not move forward with that third line item.
I think that's okay. I think we can do that. So that would be an amended, did we have a
Get it down to
motion?
the two.
We
We
don't
don't
have
have
a
a
motion
motion yet.
Okay.
We could, but we're hearing,
Someone make that motion.
I would,
that leads to that.
I would entertain as chair a motion to move forward with the first two bullets rather than all three.
That was a motion?
I would entertain.
Okay.
As chair.
In anticipation of me making such a motion, I'm just, again, trying to get clarity on, you know, is the message we're sending to city council that solid waste is such a priority that we are willing to spend more money on it? Because I'm concerned about that. And this strikes me as we're already spending a lot of money. I know a fair share of Travis's salary, for example, comes out of the 1383, SB's 1383 bucket, and solid waste is not that large a share of our overall footprint relative to transportation and buildings. So while I was trying to, you know, in the interest of keeping our city fiscally responsible and keeping our initial budget ask quite modest, I wanted us to at least consider how that might look if we propose a large number here relative to only 38,000 in transportation. So, with that preamble, I would like to move to, instead of the 90K for those two items I see here, I would recommend, I would move to cut them each in half to 15 and 30, 45 for solid waste. That's my motion. Do I have a second? Thank you.
Is there a commissioner's second for 45K for the first two bullets?
I'll second it.
There's a second. Is there further clarifying questions or discussion? Hearing none, I believe we're ready for a vote on this to adopt and move forward with potentially at the tentative level the first two solid waste items, each at the half budget shown on the slide.
Commissioner Heinerman,
Aye.
Commissioner Nickel,
Aye.
Commissioner Ward,
Aye.
Vice Chair Conlon,
Yes.
and Chair Morrell.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Water and carbon sequestration. Travis, we have several, I believe it's 3 recommendations coming forward in this arena. Those are the goals. It's further in where we have the specifics rather than go or back at this point. There's action 1, city-owned lands. Action 2, planting trees in the famous forest. And 3, rainwater capture and reuse systems.
And where's the budget?
I would recommend, the budgets are in the written material. They didn't make it into the slides. So the budgets are as follows. Carbon sequestration 1. There's the trees. There are 2 budgets for carbon sequestration. 1, there are the small, as a budget of 34,000 for the demonstration plots, and there is a much larger number, a total of 184,000, an additional 150 for the actual acquisition and labor for the sequestration.
That was item 1.
That's item 1. Item 2 is the trees. And the budget for the trees is 50,000 for the Milwaukee Forest labor plus plants and irrigation. And for the new trees, at $350 a tree, 200 new trees, that's a budget of 70. another 15,000 for greenhouse gas analysis and consulting. That gets us to a total of 135,000. But this is not all city money, most of which can be provided from successful bidding on state, federal, and foundation grants and private donations.
So what's on the screen now, if I may ask? Goal number 1, is that your BioChlor?
We're not dealing with the goals, we went to the wrong slide
Alright.
again. We have a slide with us, but there.
Carbon sequestration,
Those
that
are
is
the
it.
three asks of the Water and Carbon Ad hoc Committee.
And that's, okay. I have a comment.
Yes, please.
It's a bridge too far for me on the BioChlor to jump in as far as you're doing. I think what you need to do is have a demonstration project or two, judge the results of that. And so I took a look at what cities are doing. One of the things I was able to find out is that the Bloomberg Foundation just gave grants to Lincoln, Milwaukee, Cincinnati. They're all using the money for treatment of green waste, which is, I think, well accepted. But to go this far on the taxpayers' money without some kind of comfort level, certainly I don't mind us being a leader, and to have leadership in demonstration projects so we can see exactly the effect of it is much more prudent and much more honest to the taxpayers. So I think what you need to do is price that. You had a 34,000 for demo. Do a couple of demos for the 34. Judge the effectiveness of it before you jump full into it.
David, did you give us a budget line item for the rainwater capture?
Yes, it's here in another piece of the material that didn't make it into, here it is. Oh, that's the cash for turf. Here it comes, it's gonna be here. Range, that's the barrels, wrong page, here we are. 15,000 to begin to implement water greenhouse gas recommendations, which would be sufficient to seek funding from elsewhere. So I would propose, with acceptance from the rest of the ad hoc, a proposal budget for that of 15,000.
So $15,000 proposal.
I'll second that for the full ad hoc's report.
Right, there's other money in here, which the 15,000 would help us chase.
Understood. So I would, my motion, or second, if I understood you correctly, is to zero out the budget for 1 and 2 and put 15,000 for rainwater capture and reuse systems. I felt, in explanation, I felt that there was so much public as well as commissioner confusion around the sequestration options that I don't feel good making a proposal to the city council for us to invest city funds at this time.
I think the one naysayer has swayed too much opinion. I'm very unhappy about this, but I will
Point
be
of
out.
order.
I will be
I
out
thought
of
you
that.
had recused yourself from the
I would
voting.
recuse from the voting.
The way it happens is when you recuse yourself from the discussion. I respect the fact that you have a lot of knowledge about this, but really I've let you, because I've learned a lot from you. But please, let's not have fights about it. You are recused from the issue, and I think that was the appropriate thing to do. The rest of the group then has to discuss it and make their decisions.
I think that's great, but you've moved also into trees, from which I am not recused.
That's right. No, don't confuse me. No, you were talking about the naysayer. My naysay was the full amount of $300,000 on a full end project that I just don't feel comfortable with. Okay, you've explained why I should. You've got my interest. And my interest says, I want to see what it does. I want to understand it better. And a lot of the money that you have proposed is to study. That is great. I think we study.
Are there other comments on water and carbon sequestration?
Is there a second to my motion, or was my motion interpreted as a second of David's motion? Point of order.
Let me ask, I'll tell you what I interpreted it for, that you had removed money from the project completely. I think it's worthy of some consideration. And so I would ask you to modify the proposal for some money to study the effects that it would have.
Okay,
on demonstration.
thank you. So because we are doing this on a ad hoc by ad hoc basis, and Chair Morrell has recused himself from this item, I will then assume that I am making a motion, and my motion was 15,000 for rainwater capture. I'm hearing no second, so I'm inclined to modify my motion. Cut me off if someone else wants to make a second before I do. I can see accounting some fraction of our recommendation to the other items. I am hesitant to invest any money in biochar by the city of Sonoma on such a research grade project. I see research being done by much bigger and better informed organizations than the city of Sonoma. So I will not be able to modify my amendment to my motion to put any money into bucket one. I can see value in a Miyawaki style forest. The budget I had seen there was $135,000, which I find far too much to spend on trees for the city of Sonoma. So I will modify that to say another $15,000 for planting new trees as my amended motion. Do I have a second for those, for funding 2 and water 1? Seeing none, I withdraw my motion.
Can I make an amendment to that original motion, or just on the Miyawaki Forest budget? Just looking at the breakdown on our report, it's the 135. A portion of that is additional GHG analysis and consulting, and that's, if I'm trying to remember back from our research, what feels like a century ago, that was more of a after everything was implemented, just to see how the end results. So if we saw that budget as more of a 70K, which is more of the initial implementation, would that feel less sticker shock-esque?
To my earlier comments, I think we send the wrong signal to City Council if we overfund this ad hoc's work relative to its share of the greenhouse gas pie, and especially relative to where the science and carbon sequestration is right now, and the confidence that we would have that those investments could be recovered and realizable in the atmosphere, most importantly. So that's why I have so much angst about these larger numbers relative to the other 2 ad hocs we've discussed. So I'll probably not be able to support any funding in this area beyond about, what did I offer, 30? I offered 30. Probably 45 would be my highest, with your indulgence. Thank you.
Actually, I have a point of order and a question. This has not come up before, but when an individual recuses himself, we have an alternate commissioner. And it's usually for voting, but our city attorney's not here.
Yeah.
But my interpretation that that's part of the discussion as well, because that individual's stepping in to replace the individual that's recused. So with that, we're going to invite alternate commissioner to come up and then gets to participate in the discussion on this one item while there's a recusal.
And I assume that makes me the chair pro tempore.
That is correct.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. When I was on the Community Service Environment Commission, I was first a alternate before I became an actual commissioner. And at that time, I sat on the dais with all the other commissioners.
Mr. Metzler,
I
I'm
just
sorry.
didn't vote.
You are technically out of order, as I'm sure you're well aware. And, but for the record, that matter has previously been discussed, and we understand. So thank you. Greetings.
Greetings.
Alternate
Be up here for a
McCloskey. Now in the position of chair.
I have a point of order.
Please.
I'm recused from carbon sequest 1. I am not recused from 2 and 3. There would be no reason for me to be recused from carbon sequestration 2 on trees and the Miyawaki Forest, and no reason to be recused from rainwater capture discussion and budget analysis.
So the approach would be to pull them out.
I actually teach this a little bit.
Yeah.
I've got a great PowerPoint.
Go ahead, Mr. Hunt.
For the motion, which hasn't been made yet, you would be recused because it's including,
If it's including all 3.
yes.
Which were the rules we established when we began this proceeding around transportation first, and then moved on to the other topics. So I'm afraid I must insist as.
I don't think that's true. When we did the others, we did them one at a time. In transportation, we went through one item at a time.
But we made
and
a
now
single.
we're lumping all 3.
We made a single motion in transportation. We made a single motion in buildings. We made a single motion in waste and water. And we're making a single motion in sequestration and water. So I'm afraid that my interpretation as chair pro tempore is in sync with staff's understanding and Commissioner Heinerman's understanding as well. So without belaboring that point, I will continue the deliberations to move us toward a resolution here. Is there a motion? Since I withdrew my motion, there are no motions on the floor. And so I'm entertaining a motion on this item.
Okay. I'll, little confusion on, I think you started at 15 for trees, not 30. So.
True. 15, to clarify, I had started 15 for trees, 15 for rainwater, 30 total for the item. That was my proposal. That was no more that I withdrew.
Later you mentioned 45. So I'm going to move that with regard to water and carbon sequestration, that we budget $45,000 for the tree components and $15,000 for rainwater capture.
The motion on the floor is $45,000 for the tree component and $15,000 for the rainwater component. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
So does that mean it's, of the 3 proposals, 45,000 for 2 and 3?
Yes.
From what you said,
The
it
answer
was
is yes, no, nothing for the bioplour.
it was 45,000 for the trees and 15,000 for the rainwater capture, correct?
Right.
45 and 15 for a total of 60,000. Forgive me, I think I misspoke when I did that. So 45 for trees, 15 for rainwater, a total of 60 is the motion on the floor, a first and a second. And is there any more discussion on that? I've made myself clear about my cap.
I would just add that I think that's a good amount, the 45,000, because of what happened with Nathanson Creek. they were such a big result, and that was less than that, I believe.
Without any further conversation, I'll call for a roll call.
Commissioner Heinerman,
Aye.
Commissioner Nickel,
Aye.
Commissioner McCloskey,
Aye.
Commissioner Ward,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Conlon.
No.
Thank you. The motion passes 4-1 with one abstain.
Commissioner Morrell, please resume your duties.
Thank you. We're moving on to the next ad hoc topic, which is government operations. Is there a summary chart at 9:15, 3.5 hours in, on government operations?
So the way we are presenting this, even though it is 9 total items, I think with my co-commissioners, co-ad hoc committee members' approval, do we want to do this as 2 items, or just one item? One item, $40,000, just to really nail into these really smaller, minute avenues to improve government operations.
Are there any commissioners with concepts on this question?
Was that a motion, Commissioner Ward?
It wasn't. It was
Heard a
just
question, not a motion.
trying to make sure that we were all on the same page with it, and it seems that we are. So now I would like to move forward with a motion to present the government operations budget proposal as is.
I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second.
I don't think, unfortunately, the youth member
All right.
can offer
I
a
think
second.
we need another.
But your spirit is documented.
We appreciate your spirit. We have the youth member and the senior member who was recused once before. So we're both in the same boat, Kendall.
Well,
We-
I'd be happy to second that. If
There's
no,
a second now on the 40,000 for 9 items, summarized in 2 bullets here on the slide. Is there discussion of these 9 items or the $40,000 budget request? Hearing none, is there?
Is this is for in-house planning?
In-house implementation is what I remember from 3 hours ago. These are 9 different items to be done within the government buildings.
Well, I'm just talking about this 40,000 here.
So am I.
Yeah,
This
okay.
is for the 40,000 for 9 items that include locks on the windows and whatever it all was.
Okay, all right.
So we have a motion and a second. We have limited discussion. I think we're ready for a vote. I don't hear a lot of excited discussion.
Okay. Commissioner Heinerman,
Aye.
Commissioner Nickel,
Aye.
Commissioner Ward,
Aye.
Vice Chair Conlon,
aye.
and Chair Morrell.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, now we're next moving on to the community engagement proposal with a very small budget, as I recall, of $3,500 and a series of resident engagement activities that were proposed some hours ago. Do we need any further review of the proposals? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the project as proposed in 7 or 9 slides, whatever the number is, and the related written material that's in the agenda, and the $3,500 budget.
I would second it.
Didn't hear a motion, but I appreciate the second.
I'd like to make a motion to
Thank you very much,
approve
Amber.
this budget.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any intense discussion? Seeing not too much, we'll call for a roll call vote. Matthew?
Commissioner Heinerman,
Aye.
Commissioner Nickel,
Aye.
Commissioner Ward,
Aye.
Vice Chair Conlon,
Yes?
and Chair Morrell.
Enthusiastically, aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
Now have a series of items recommended to move forward to the council that exceeds the number that staff has suggested the council would be willing to entertain. So it seems to me we have two options. One is to completely follow that guidance and find a way to hone this number of approved items down, both the items and their budget categories. The other is to disregard staff guidance and bring all of these items before the council. Seems to me we have, as a commission, the authority to do either, and I would entertain a discussion of that difference.
I'd like to ask Dr. Wagner what his impression is of what we need to be doing for the city council.
I actually haven't communicated in any way with the city council. This is with the city manager, who suggested that 3 to 4 actions would be reasonable, followed by a presentation and discussion to the city council. That's all the guidance I have.
May I make a suggestion? And my suggestion is that we can narrow down and pick one from each list if we want, but all of them should be presented. I think they're all important issues, and I mean, we can do it by per group, but I think the entire recommendation should be made.
I would certainly agree with Philip's view that the interim city manager, who's about to be replaced by a new city manager, may have a different view, and I think this commission has a right to bring forth whatever we want to bring forth. For the council has the authority. All we can do is yak and present, and they have decision-making authority. But why should we be constrained by that limited guidance? So I would agree I would entertain a motion to bring forth all of those items with the budgets that we've now approved.
I would too, and I appreciate this conversation. I do think the council deserves to hear all of what the work we put into this. I'm wondering if we could help by prioritizing the actions in if there's anything else we can do to help council. Is that reasonable to ask?
Just a suggestion, the expectation is it will be a formal presentation of up to 5 minutes by the chair or designee. So hopefully that just might help you figure out how you want to present this, and there will be time to work on this.
Agreed, but I'm thinking, I want to hear from my co-commissioners on what they see the priorities, because we've been very granular in the details of each ad hoc, and now that we're stepping back and I'm looking at the budget, it looks like trees and rainwater is our top priority based on the $60,000 we've allocated to it. And I want to be sure if that's in fact the signal we want to send, or if there's something else that we would use to prioritize these. I frankly don't like that signal as I expressed earlier.
You can do it in an objective way, which is to weight transportation because of the percentage of GHG emissions as the number one issue.
If that's the guidance, I mean, I'm comfortable with that, frankly, because I think, as we said in our transportation presentation, we are actually leveraging a lot of other money the city's already agreed to spend. So that's why the number is so low. So I can appreciate that as well. I'm comfortable moving forward with the motion then to approve the stack as is and emphasize transportation. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second on the floor to bring forth the elements with an emphasis on the importance of transportation. I would add that emphasis on transportation would be reinforced by the next item on the agenda if we get to it tonight, or if we table it for a subsequent meeting, that the issues of parking and climate smart tourism deal explicitly with transportation.
Sorry, I
And
can't hear you. What did you say?
the mic is on. I may be getting tired after 3.5 hours. I'm glad nobody else is. The emphasis on transportation can be presented to the council along with the balance of money, which appears to be focused more on other items that are ready to roll.
Okay, are we on the climate smart tourism?
We are not.
Okay.
We only mentioned that that's coming next, and that's relevant to transportation, obviously. So we have a motion and a second, I believe, on the floor to approve the items as recommended throughout the 5 components in their entirety for presentation to the council on May something or other, 12th, some such number, the appropriate date in the month of May. Is there further discussion of said motion?
I just, point of clarification, because maybe I wrote down the wrong number. Did we approve $200,000 for the shuttle? That's what I had written? Okay, just
No,
want to
we
make sure.
did not.
Cool. I didn't think so.
That would indicate further focus on transportation, to be sure. All right, with a point of clarification, is there further discussion on the motion on the floor? Hearing none, I would call for a roll call vote. Matthew?
Commissioner Heinerman,
Aye.
Commissioner Nickel,
Aye.
Commissioner Ward,
Aye.
Vice Chair Conlon,
Aye.
and Chair Morrell.
Unanimous, aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Okay, let me look back at the agenda. So we have now completed discussion and selection of our recommended priority. The next item on the agenda is 3.2, Climate Smart Tourism and Parking in Sonoma. I believe that to be an incredibly important topic. For one, I would recommend that we table this to a special meeting 2 weeks from now. I would entertain a motion because I'm tired and I would be surprised if no one else is tired. And maybe we'll get more people to attend in 2 weeks in the public than at 9:30 at night when we've been underway since 6 p.m. But that's just my personal view, and I would entertain a motion to have a special meeting of the Climate Action Commission and postpone the item 3.2 for that discussion.
I so move.
And I will second that motion.
Is there any clarifying questions on this motion? Hearing none, is there a discussion of this motion?
I would just point out that in anticipation of this, I did reach out to some members of the community, specifically Tim Zahner at the Visitors Bureau and Mark Bodenhammer at the Chamber of Commerce. And I told them I think we need to have their participation for this to be a successful conversation, and that we don't have a specific agenda here, but we do wish to begin a discussion. And I did have a good, frank discussion with Mr. Zahner and look forward to working with those parties in the future. So I look forward to closing this night out and continuing this at a different time.
And I'm opposed to the motion for a good reason and a personal reason. The good reason is that I think this is something that deserves the discussion you've had with other people on the committee. I'm not a traffic planner, I'm not a tourist person. My wife will tell you there's not much I do right, but those are 2 things we'll both agree on. The other reason is because I have a judge who wants me in a courtroom, and as much as I respect you, Mr. Chairperson, I can't be here for that meeting. But I think it's a little premature until we've had really vetted out what the issues are from other aspects of the community. I don't think you can do that in 2 weeks. Maybe you disagree, but so I think it's something that is deserving discussion with the city planner as well as tourism people. And, you know, we can learn better from those inputs.
There's always more learning possible. I wouldn't imagine that in 2 weeks we'll have all the answers. Obviously not. This was agendized a long time ago. We waited until tonight to get to it. It's my sense that we don't have the ability to get to it in an organized and appropriate way at 9:31 this evening. And so I would recommend that it be postponed. My recommendation is 2 weeks from now. And I'm sorry you couldn't be here for that. And that can happen to any of us at any time, to be sure. Are there other commissioner comments with this discussion? Seeing none, I believe we have a motion on the floor. Am I right? I'm admittedly getting tired. We have a motion and a second on the floor, ready for a vote? Is
Yes.
that right?
Yep.
That's my right. Call a vote.
Okay. Commissioner Heinerman,
Nay.
Commissioner Nickel,
Aye.
Commissioner Ward,
Aye.
Vice Chair Conlon.
I'm debating Commissioner Heinerman's comments in my head. I will vote yes on this measure.
Okay. And Chair Morrell.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Then we move, and thank you. Any other commissioner member reports and comments from my colleagues? Just a brief comment of my own, just so everybody knows what the numbers in the public as well as my fellow commissioners. On April 16th, which is coming up at Sonoma Garden Park, there's a ceremony to recognize the new natural playground. And those of you, it's very climate oriented and a very interesting model natural playground. You're all invited around noon. Other than that, I have no further comments. I'm not seeing any others. Staff comments and announcements.
I just want
Tom?
to thank everybody for what we knew was going to be a long night. Look, we still have members of the public here, so thank you so much for sticking with this. This is not easy. We are committed to doing this work. Thank you so much.
Staff comments from Dr. Wagner.
Thank you, Chair Morrell. Staff has no further comments at this time. Thank you.
Then I'm going to adjourn the meeting.